and welcome to tonight's Literary Walkers event. We're so excited to have you here. We are expecting more people and they will join. I want to wait just maybe 2 minutes to allow others to join before we officially start. But thank you for spending your evening with walkers and with books, one of our favorite things. I'm noticing who's here and where everyone's all from. It's exciting. We have pretty much four corners of the country here right now in the middle. All right, I'm going to start by just saying it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's featured author from the class of 1987, Nigar Alam. And Nigar, I'm just going to find the thing that I was going to read about you. Forgive me. Nigar was born in Karachi, Pakistan, and she spent her childhood in Turkey, Nigeria, Italy, Kenya, Indonesia, and the United States, of course, including her time at Walker's, before returning to Karachi. With an MBA and a CPA, she has worked in both brand management and auditing. She has currently been teaching at Anoka Ramsey Community College, and she lives with her family in Minnesota. And I would also like to introduce our moderator, who is Andrea Nelson Abbott from the class of 1983. She's Executive Director of Book Publishing and Culture at Condé Nast. And we really, really appreciate both of you being here to talk about this wonderful book. And I would just like to turn it over to you.
Well, as I am the moderator, I should probably start and say, again, welcome, Nigar. It's exciting. Love the book. Really just a splendid read, wonderful characters, compelling story, everything you want in a book that I learned in my 4 years at Walker's. And I thought actually a good place to begin was to ask you, obviously I always read the author blurb in the back, and as Marian just read, it was curious because you have degrees in marketing and accounting and things like that, and I thought I wanted to ask you, given all that, if you could sort of walk us through when you started to have an inkling of this book and kind of how you sort of saw it through. You know, oh God, my cat, I'm sorry for the meow. So maybe you just want to start with that. Were you driving home one day? Were you, crunching CPA numbers, whatever it was? And how did most people I know like have an idea, maybe I want to write a book about something, but how did you bring it to fruition?
Yeah, that's a great question. And thank you for having me here. And thank you for everyone for being here. So, I've always been a big reader. And I think most writers are just big readers to start with. And perhaps because we were newer immigrants to America, it was never really suggested that I go into the arts. No one ever said don't go into the arts, but it was never sort of a suggestion, or no one even said that you write well, so maybe you can think of this. It was always get a career in which you have a paycheck, which is very safe and reliable. So I think that's why I went into business. And it is a very, accounting, you can always get a job in accounting. So it made sense that way. But I've always wanted to write, and I always wrote in short form as a hobby on the side, because that was fine, in my family. You can do arts on the side. And it was about
What do you mean by short form? Short stories or?
Not short stories, but really short form, like flash fiction. just
Okay.
a couple of hundred words. And even when I was writing my so-called journal or diary as a younger person, it was always in fiction form, which is very unusual. But I would take a situation that happened to me, fictionalize it, and work through it that way instead of actually writing what happened to me. And it was about 10 years ago that I thought, now I want to write a novel, but I'm very nerdy. And so I knew that I had to study it, but I wasn't in a place in my life that I could go back to college and do an MFA or, do a degree. I took a class here at the Loft Literary Center, which is like one of the largest nonprofit literary centers in the country. It was a class on the writing craft and critique, and I just loved it. The teacher would give us critique. The feedback you got from the fellow students was excellent. I learned how to give and take critique, which is really hard. And then that started my journey of 4 years of intense study by more classes and conferences, podcasts, because there's so much even free material out there, blogs and books on the craft of writing. And while I was doing that, I was writing a novel in those 4 years. And I even got into a mentorship program with the novel, but unfortunately, I didn't get a literary agent. And at that time, I didn't know much about self-publishing. I just thought the route was you get a literary agent and then they sell it to one of the big publishers. So I put that novel in a drawer or on a file on my laptop, and I started another one. And I remember my husband was just, he had seen me go through 4 years of waking up at 4:30 in the morning, trying to get my writing in or my classwork or something before the day job and the kids and all of that started. So when I put that one in the drawer and started the next one, he was like, oh my God, you're going to do it again? And with no guarantee of outcome, he's a banker. So he was like, he actually said to me, this writing thing, what is the ROI of that? And I said, it's the joy it gives me. That is the ROI. It's just plain joy. Because I think you have to love the process in writing. Writing is not publishing. They're like two different things. One is the art, one is the business. So if you really just enjoy the art, then you can just do it for no with no guarantee of getting published. And that's where I think is the best place for writers to be mentally. And then when I started the second one, there was another mentorship offered by a literary agency this time. And I hadn't even finished it. I was just about 50 pages in. And this is an agency in London. And they had this inaugural sort of mentorship program in which they would select 6 writers to mentor and to represent. And so I submitted and I got selected and I got agency representation from them. And then the rest is history.
And you were still writing all of this while you were doing your regular job?
I was, but I'm an adjunct, so it's not full-time teaching because that requires a lot of admin work and committees and all of that. So I was working very part-time, but still I feel like accounting, I teach financial accounting. It takes a very different part of my brain. So it was a lot of switching back and forth and then the children and, pick and drop and swim practice and basketball and all of that. So often I'd be writing in the car or while I'm waiting for some child or something, just fitting it in wherever I could.
And as you got further into the writing process, and I'm assuming this agency in London, which gave you the mentorship, but was also a literary agency, were they the ones who then pitched your book to various publishers in New York?
That's right. That's right. So my agent's name is Giles. It's a very English name. And he and I would just Zoom because this was during the pandemic and there was no way of visiting. And so we would Zoom and he would give me an edit letter after each draft, which was basically just a whole bunch of questions that he would ask so that I would put all the layers in the novel and fill in the plot holes. And so he would pose the questions, and then I would think of how to solve that dilemma, and then I would rewrite it and submit it again to him. So we did various rounds of this. And then when we thought it was all polished and ready for submission to publishers, that's when he sort of took it out on sub, which means he submitted it to a list of editors, acquiring editors at different publishing houses.
And were you in a position, I mean, most writers are lucky if they get a bid from one house. Did you know you wanted to, well, Putnam is part of Penguin Random House, so there are only a couple of other big publishers, obviously. Did you look at multiple imprints or publishing houses, or were you taken with Putnam right away?
Well, what happened was when he submitted it, he told me that we will at least take 2 months to hear back from anyone. Basically, he didn't want me to email him and ask him what's happening. I think it was his way of warning me, like, don't bug me. No one's going to answer for 2 months. So I had planned a trip to see my parents. They live in Karachi, Pakistan. And I had missed the year before because of the pandemic. And so that January, I said, okay, you submit it, Giles, and I'm leaving. So that was the plan. And I would go away for a couple of weeks, come back, just relax and not bother him. I was on a flight. This was the days when we had the vaccination, but we also needed that negative COVID test to fly.
Yeah.
Right. And it had to be valid like 24 hours before. And it was just very complicated. And so I did all of that. I got on the flight. It was Turkish Airlines, and I had to get a connection in Istanbul. And there was this freak snowstorm that actually there were ceilings that fell down at the airport because of the snow, and the roads were so hundreds, and it's the largest European airport in terms of flights. So everyone was diverted, and like my flight was diverted to the southern Turkey beach resort, a teeny weeny little airport. And then we were bused to all these fancy hotels in the middle of the winter. So they were empty. But this all happened on my way to Karachi, and that's where I got the call. And I said to Giles that you said 2 months. He said, well, there is an editor who's interested. It had been 1 week, you know.
Wow.
And so I was there in the hotel. I didn't have a charger that worked because the sockets are different. But Tara called me from New York, and Giles had warned me, don't consider this an offer. Okay. This is just a conversation. Just be smart and sound smart. And so I was like, okay, no pressure. And we had a great conversation. Tara is also the editor of Where the Crawdads Sing.
Oh,
And
sure. Yeah.
yeah, I didn't know that before because, I'm not in the industry as such, so I don't know, but I found out later. But that conversation was so lovely because I felt that she got it. She got what I was trying to do with the book. And she felt it was very tight and it wouldn't require a lot of revision. She had some ideas, and we spoke about that. And after that, she just offered in a couple of days, and I felt like I couldn't get a better editor. And so we pulled, all the others. Yeah.
Well, so just for our participants who might not be conversant in the publishing industry, Nigar's story it's pretty extraordinary because most people they write, they submit, and it goes nowhere. Editors are overwhelmed with projects, likewise for agents. So I do think you must have, and I think probably the best thing you did was have a very refined copy to manuscript when you sent it in, because a lot of times things get rejected because they just don't have the time to really figure it out.
It was very polished. At one point, Giles was apologetic. He was like, I'm sorry, but you need to do this again, rewrite, rewrite, rewrite. And
No, he's
I
smart.
said,
That's the right time to do it. That's
yeah,
got you
I,
there.
I remember I emailed him and I said, Giles, I will do as many drafts as you want because I want this published. So we were on the same page. We were working really hard trying to, but I think like with all art, there is a significant amount of luck in the sense that the right manuscript in front of the right editor at the right time. So all of that has to come together. And you just have to keep on putting yourself out there because it didn't come together with my previous manuscript, but then it came together. So just keep on sort of writing and then hope that it will all fall into place. Yeah.
So I think obviously anytime there's a piece of fiction like this, which is, it's so vivid, surely you've been asked, how much of this is reality? Are you Rosina? I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name right.
Perfectly.
Rosie.
Perfect.
But and then there's of course people who I think lie and say it's all fiction, none of it's true. And I'm like, really? You pulled this whole incredible story with these details out of nowhere? Find that hard to believe. That said, are you comfortable telling us like where sort of this must have bubbled up from your background a bit?
Yeah, so the inspiration for the story is definitely wanting to know more about my parents' youth and their family struggle during and after partition. And I don't know if everyone here has read the book or if they're familiar with partition, but I will try to explain it in like 3 sentences. It was a historical event that happened in 1947 in the region of South Asia, which today are the countries of Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. So that area, all of it was known as British India because the British ruled over it as a colony. And that they had ruled for over 200 years. And in 1947, the people of the land finally got their independence. So everyone rejoiced, of course. But that time of partition in which the two independent nations of Pakistan and India were created, it came with a lot of chaos and a lot of violence. And it resulted in one of the largest human migrations in history. So more than 15 million people migrated and up to 1 million died. And so my parents were part of that migration, and their families fled their homes and crossed the border with like a suitcase or two and crossed the border into Pakistan. So growing up, I had only heard one or two very pleasant, easy to tell stories about that time. And that's all I heard. I think there comes an age when you want to know more. And when I was younger, I guess I just didn't want to know more. I just accepted what it was. And then as I grew older, I asked questions, especially when I thought that I want to write about it. And nobody in my family wanted to revisit that time. No one wanted to speak of it. And so immediately I shifted my research to the more conventional forms of research like documentaries and nonfiction and newspaper archives and all of those things. And I came across a couple of organizations that are collecting and archiving oral histories from survivors because it's been 76 years now. So every year there are fewer survivors, fewer witnesses of partition. And so there's this big effort to find those survivors and interview them and then archive their stories. And I learned from that there are many, many people who've never spoken about it. So it wasn't just my family that didn't want to revisit. And so I thought, even though this event of partition happened 20 years before my book even begins, because it starts in the 1960s, my characters would also have been children at the time of partition, right? Just like my parents. And I wanted to examine what the effect of such a traumatic event is on the lives of children and how it continues to ripple throughout their lives, affecting all their decisions, their loves, and everything that they choose to do. So that's where the idea came from. But truly, this is a fictional story. There are many doctors in my family because it was in the 60s, women would either teach or become doctors. That was a very standard kind of career. So most women did not have careers, but those who did would either be teachers or doctors. So we have a lot of female doctors in the family. So it felt natural to make Rosina a pediatrician. And one thing that is less fiction than the actual plot is the house, Rosina's house, because
Okay.
yeah, because I actually lived in a similar house with my grandmother when she was in her 80s. I moved to Karachi after all those different countries I'd lived in and graduating from Walker's. And I lived with her. We were just the two of us in that big house that my grandparents had moved into at the time of partition. So it was that house. And I do think I became the favorite grandchild because I lived with her.
Sure.
But so I have a lot of great memories of the architecture, that street, which was not called Prince Road, but a street in which there were homes that were built before partition, but the people who lived in them were the people who crossed the border one way, and they were empty houses because the people in those houses crossed the border the other way. So it was like a swap. Yeah.
As you did research and your family, I don't know how many of your prior generation, your parents, you were in touch with, or even if they were alive when you were writing the book, but were you able to get more information from them as you were writing the book? And when you said, well, I am writing this and this is what I'm learning, were they more willing to open up, or is it still a kind of don't want to talk about it?
Yeah, that is such a good question because I just expected that, they just don't want to talk. And that's okay because I respect that. But after I had written the draft and I was working on revisions, I started hearing from them, little WhatsApp messages, and it was just a huge gift for me because I never expected to learn these things. And I don't know why they chose to do it at that time, maybe because the whole atmosphere was a lot of talking about partition suddenly, and I was writing about it, or they were in a more peaceful place themselves that they felt that they could talk about certain things. But has been a true gift of this book among many other gifts. But to know more about my own family and their experiences was really special. Yeah.
I was wondering if you could maybe break down a little bit for our readers how the caste system works, or worked even in the novel. There's the Molly, these people are living so close and they spend a lot of time together, and yet there are these clear demarcations in America that's all marked by money for the most part. That's how I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah. So the caste system actually is more something you would find in India because it's related to religion. But in Pakistan, it is more socioeconomic. However, the upward mobility is very, very difficult because it's not just based on money or education. It's more like, well, who was your dad? I feel like it's more like the British class system, in which they just know where you came from. I don't know how, but it's just there are certain classes. There's the nobility class, and then there's I think they call it like the middle class, which is people without titles, perhaps. But I think it is pretty rigid in the 60s, that class system. Over the years, what's happened is that in Pakistan, the children of the servant class, for just to explain what that is, they have moved upwards. They work in IT, they work in offices, they've gotten the education, and they have moved. So it has changed over the years, but in the 60s, I think there was a very sort of firm line that either you are, the people who are served, or you are those who serve.
I
Yeah.
did think, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, Harris?
Yeah,
Harris?
Harris.
Okay.
Yes.
Your descriptions of his family and friends were very mob-like to me.
Oh,
They were very, like,
yeah.
I felt they were very, we will get you, we know where we can figure out how to ruin your lives.
Yeah.
And that was very anxiety provoking, obviously, in the book. And is that something that you still feel like that those people still have that kind of power?
Yeah, I think the real upper echelon, they really do. They really do have that power. Yeah.
Do you think, I was wondering, because this, the book is based on a series, obviously, among other things, of secrets that are unspooled over the course of the novel. Do you feel that the secrets are specific to the culture? Do you think all families have such hidden secrets? You've lived in America now for a long time. You've lived in other countries. I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, I think there's this theme that's going through the novel, which in Urdu, the language spoken there, is "Log kya kahenge," which translates directly to "What will people say?" Right? And
Mm.
in that culture, which is less individualistic, that it really makes a big difference, and it has a huge control over people. What will people say if you do this? Of course, to a certain extent, it happens everywhere. It may not be society, it might just be parents or a close family that you worry about. What will they say if they knew this? So in I think the secrets do grow from that sort of societal expectation and what is considered appropriate behavior. And that's why secrets there may be less uh, dangerous in a country like America, and also less dangerous in modern day Pakistan. The older timeline was the 60s. I also think that financial independence for women makes a huge difference, because then they aren't controlled by other people as much, and they can make their decisions even if they're ostracized, but that financial independence gives them strength. And in the 60s it really wasn't universal at all. Even today it isn't in Pakistan.
I'm curious I mean, we talked a little bit about your family being more receptive and opening up when they knew you were writing the book. What was the reception when your book was completed? And I would even, I'm just wondering, what was there a difference in the reception from your family and your friends from Pakistan versus your American friends? And you've lived elsewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, it was so different. The funny thing about writing is you write this book and then readers make it their own, you know? So I've heard from so many readers who pick out different things from the book that they can really relate to. And for a lot of the non-Pakistani and non-South Asian readers that I've met, partition was a very new thing for them. And because where would you hear about it? Where would you read it? It's not really a very average, historical event that you would find in your history books in high school. So I think partition made a huge impact on American readers. And even though my British publisher, he said, you only spend about 5 pages on partition. I said, I know, but I think for people who've never heard about it, it makes a big impact. And I hope I've given them enough, but not too much, because it's not a history book. So for some people it's partition, but for a lot of the Pakistani readers, including my parents, it really was the story of the people and their backstory, the emotional truths, the pain, those things resonated more with them. I was asked once, like, what were you most worried about your parents reading? And the first thought that came to my mind was the kissing. I was like, I don't want them to read about kissing because what will they, they'll think I'm sitting there imagining kissing. It's just too embarrassing. But I'm so old, and why should I worry about that? But that's the first thing that came to my mind. But I did worry that they should feel that I did justice to a time and a place and a feeling that they went through themselves, and they did. They loved it. They were very proud of the book, so I was very happy. Yeah.
How do you feel about the generation that will grow up having known nothing about the partition? I mean, this is, oh, and by the way, I've been referring to it as the partition, and I hear you say partition. Is it called partition without the qualifying the?
Yes, you can just call it partition.
Partition, okay.
Yes.
There's always these major historical events, and then society begins to recognize that they're no longer going to be anybody who lived it or witnessed it, shall I say. And what does that mean? Do you have any sense of are there people who feel a sense of this will be its own kind of tragedy when we don't have members of our society alive who have this memory or knowledge?
Yeah, definitely. I feel that it's a huge loss to lose those individuals who actually saw it and lived through it. And I think that's why on both sides of the border, in India and in Pakistan and even in the United States, there's this effort to contact those survivors who have spread all over the world now and record their actual experiences and their emotions and their thoughts and everything, so we can preserve and revisit. Because today, that region is about 1/5 of the world's population. If you add the population of Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh, it's about 1/5 of the world. So it's pretty large, right?
Right.
And to date, politics is affected by partition. And it's really important for us to know about it and remember it and hopefully heal from it. My desire was, if we don't even recognize that there was trauma, then how do we even begin to heal from it? How can we, if we don't talk about it, how can we heal from it? And the whole region needs to heal from it so that the politics is not affected as much by this awful, awful event that happened. So yes, we have to remember it.
What did you find the most? We started by asking, take us through the narrative of when you started this, and then we wound up in when it was submitted and accepted. From that whole process, what did you find the most grueling, and conversely, the most rewarding?
Oh, wow. One thing that really surprised me in that whole publishing process was I always thought I was really good at grammar. Okay. I loved English class. And I remember all through school, we always did grammar, like in the beginning of every year. I don't know if kids do that anymore, but I loved it. And I was excellent at my commas and everything. I was just really good at it. I loved it. But apparently, I don't know how to use a comma, because when I got the copy edit notes, and they were very kind because they taught me how to use commas. And then they, made the notes on it, but it was very embarrassing. So I don't know why. Maybe the rules have changed. I don't know. But I was very bad at that. Yeah.
I can assure you they've seen a lot worse. And
Okay.
it's copy writers they're unlike anybody. I mean,
Yes.
I feel like my grammar is really good too, but I still have to look things up. And I'm sure if I submitted any piece of my writing, which I thought was good, to a copywriter, I would be slaughtered. So I think but that is very interesting. And
It was, yeah.
was okay, so your book was accepted, the manuscript was accepted, and from how long from that point did it take you to have the finished book in your hands?
Okay, so I was told that usually it takes about, with the larger publishers, it takes 2 years from the time of the book deal to the publication. And so my situation was faster because it was 18 months. It was exactly 18 months from the book deal to publication. And I think that happened because, as I said, we had worked on it so hard and it was really tight. We didn't do many revisions, Tara and
Mm-hmm.
I. We didn't do many at all. In fact, she told me that she doesn't want the plot changed at all. So that saves a lot of time. If your plot isn't changing, then you don't have to rework the entire structure of the novel. We had about 3 edits, but very small ones. And it was very interesting because the things that she asked me to work on were, for example, how to increase the impact of the ghosts on the page. So the characters who were dead to begin with, and they were there in the novel, but she wanted the impact to be increased.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to think about how to do that, and I think it was really great suggestion. So those were the kind of things I worked on. Some of the relationships were just making them a little deeper or layering some emotion in it, hitting those emotional beats, but nothing really significant. And I think that's why it just took 18 months. I'm saying just because I know that it's considered to be very fast for publishing. Yeah.
Right. And what, so for our participants, um, once a book is printed and in stores, then the next big hurdle is getting the word out. And as everybody knows, there's just more and more and more competition for everybody's attention. And often, I mean, the very best way, I mean, you have reviews, but even local newspapers, there are fewer and fewer of them, is to get the author, and you always hope you have as lovely an author as Nigar, who can speak very well, out there and promoting the book. How did they set you up for that?
That was so hard. To be honest, I thought writers just write in their room alone because that's how I like to be, just imaginary people talking to each other in my brain. And then you just publish the book and then you go write your next one and the book just sells. It doesn't happen that way, not anymore at least. So I did get some media training from a publicist and she gave me really great tips that seem so logical and normal, but they were very helpful. Things like when you are being interviewed, make sure you listen. It's like, okay. She said, don't be thinking about what your hair is doing and, whatever, or what other people are saying, or don't get distracted by noise. Make sure you listen because you can never ask the interviewer to repeat the question. I was like, okay. So little tips like that and how to pitch. It's very hard for me to like sell myself. It's very awkward. But she did practices with me. It's all very sort of embarrassing, I have to say, but it's something that's required. And yeah,
I mean, a
I'm
lot of
learning.
books, quite honestly, when the the book is done and then the author backs out and says, I can't do anything, it's a disaster for the publisher because the author is the best advocate. So I'm actually curious who are some of your favorite authors that you maybe love to read or inspired you for the book?
Yeah, I can't pick modern day authors that are my favorite because that really is like picking a favorite child, you know. But I can tell you about inspirations. One, I mean, I love dead bodies, and there is a dead body in the book. I don't think that's a spoiler because I think that's somewhere on the flag too. And so the most wonderful books that I remember from my childhood, apart from Judy Blume, are Agatha Christie, right? I probably read them way too early. I shouldn't have read them that early, but they were just wonderful. And I think I read each one several times. The first book that made a very big impact on me from the region of South Asia, because I went to American schools even when I was moving around. So most of my libraries had books by non-South Asian authors. Okay, so the first book that I read that made a big impact was by an author called Vikram Seth, an Indian author, and the book was called A Suitable Boy. It's a huge book, like 900 pages. I don't even know how I read it, but I loved it. And recently they made it into a BBC series in London. But this was a long, long time ago. I don't know, 30 years, a very, very long time ago. And I don't remember what happened in it, but I remember what it made me feel, like the best books, you know. And I completely fell in love with the character called Kabir, a young guy. I just fell in love with him. And I told myself, when I have, or if I have a son, I'm going to name him Kabir. Okay. I was very young. And then some years later, I had a son. And I suggested this name, but it was vetoed by my husband and my mother. Yeah. And so he got a different name. He's very happy. He's not called Kabir, but I have a character in this book, and I gave him the name Kabir because I was like, I cannot forget that character from that. But it's a very small role in my book, but very important, I think. And so, books to me have always had a very special place, even if they're fiction, because I don't really consider fiction to be any less than nonfiction, because again, it's what it makes you feel, right?
Sure.
And yeah, so that was my little shout out to a book that I loved a very, very long time ago. I don't even remember what happened in it, but yeah.
What was your when you started thinking about the book and writing it, did you always have in mind that you were going to be doing a dual timeline?
Oh, yes, I did. I love dual timelines. I just love reading them. So, I we write what we love to read, isn't that right? So I started the chapter one, surprisingly, has not changed. And I think that is also very rare. But my chapter one has basically stayed the same throughout the whole process. And that's in the present day. For those of you who haven't read it yet, it's a present day chapter. So I wrote that, and then I kind of knew where it would end. But I spent the next so many like months writing the past timeline, the 1964 timeline, because I wanted to completely immerse myself in that era. And I had to do research for it because I'm not that old that I was an adult in the 60s. And so I had to do research and sort of create that world in my mind and immerse myself completely. So I didn't want to pull myself out to modern day times and then back into the past. So I just focused on the past timeline with little markers of what could possibly happen in the present day timeline as I was going ahead. And then after one draft, I came back and I wove in the two timelines.
That's very interesting. I would not, it flows so seamlessly. Also, where did you get the idea, which I did think was quite brilliant, and I don't remember where you started. Was it like 6 days before the event or 4 days. That was
It was
really,
something, yeah.
yeah, it was a really great conceit, I guess I would say, because it each chapter was giving you more, and I, for one, had no clue what was coming. And you really delivered quite a punch.
Ah, thank you, thank you. Well, that little time sort of countdown
Yeah,
was entirely Tara's idea, my editor at Putnam.
okay.
Yeah, yeah, that was
Yeah,
her
it was
idea.
really, I really enjoyed it. I'm sure everybody would like to know what you have in store next for us.
Oh, well, I can't jinx it by talking about it, but it is in early stages, and um, let's see. That's all I can say.
Oh, come
Yeah.
on, can't you give us a crumb?
Um,
I don't think
it's
you'll jinx it if you just give us are
I
we
can
on
give
the
you
same
like
subject or?
we are not on the same subject,
Okay,
and yeah, and but we could be in the same country, but in the 90s, which is
okay.
a very different time period. Yeah.
Also, in reading your bio, you seem to have lived in
Mhm.
multiple places. Did you live in many places as a child, or did you as an adult, which or both?
Yeah. No, it was as a child. All of those countries were before I turned 18. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, yeah, and I think, when I think about why I chose to write about four childhood friends, now
Mhm.
that I look back at it, I think it's because I was always fascinated by childhood friends because I didn't have any. We would move and then we would go to school. I would make friends. I was lucky. I could always make friends. But then in a year or two, I would lose them because I would move or they would move. And then we'd move like to another country on another continent. And in the olden days, there was no internet. So we weren't going to be writing letters to each other. We completely lost touch. And I was always fascinated by those people who could grow up in one town all their lives. And sometimes I say that in author talks, and then people come up to me afterwards and say, we could not wait to get out of our town. So I don't know. I guess you always want what you don't have. And yeah.
Were you moving around because of your parents' professional obligations?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
My father, he worked for, I don't know if any of you remember Singer Sewing Machine. So Singer Sewing Machine Company. Yeah. So he was in the international division, and that's why he would get transferred from country to country. Yeah. And actually, Walker's was my fourth high school. Yeah.
Wait, so did you
And
come as a senior?
I know I came in the middle of my junior year. Just, yeah.
Not an easy time.
No, I mean, it didn't feel that hard then, but now when I say things like it was my fourth high school, I feel like must have been so difficult. But I think Walker's gave me uh, a, an amount of stability that I really needed at that time. It was a safe space. It was stability for more than 1.5 years, and it was what I needed. And it worked out really, really well. I was very lucky to be there. Yeah.
Um, did you have a, did you love all of your characters equally?
I did. I did. I have a favorite because you were allowed to, I think. So Rosina is my favorite. She's
Right.
my favorite because I'm just so proud of her that she managed to, with all of the struggles, managed to fulfill her needs and balance them with, family and not lose herself completely to society's expectations. So even with all the losses and the struggles in her life, I think she was in a good place as an older person in her 80s. When the book opens, she's in a good place, even though she had certain regrets or
Yes,
issues.
she's a very self-reflective character. And I found, I was very curious as I was reading it. Well, first of all, it was so, it really struck me that you could be both a pediatrician and castigated for not being married. Which, I mean, to me, medical training is the height of the height of the height. I mean, that's just so rigorous. And so you have this terribly rigorous career with, yeah, but don't forget, the most important thing is that you get married. And I was kind of curious if the extent to which that has changed now in Pakistan. I'm woefully ignorant, so I don't know to what extent there are arranged marriages, or even, I know that in India, because I have listened to podcasts about this, one thing that is holding India back from becoming a truly huge international engine of the economy is they don't have enough women participating in the economy. So, but I don't really know more. That's just sort of a fact I know in my head, and I don't know how it works with different classes.
Yeah, it's absolutely, it is the same even now in Pakistan. And if you are in sort of the upper middle class and higher, it's different. You know, you can get away with not being married and you can make your own decisions and have that independence. But for the majority, by far, for the majority, marriage for women is the goal. You know, being a doctor is just something you did to pass the time while you were waiting to get married. And, you know, that's what matters. You have to be married. I know it feels like another world, but and it does mean that there's very little participation by women in the economy. That would certainly change the entire economy if women participated equally. Yeah.
Are your children interested? I don't know how old your children are. You referred to swim practice, so young enough that you are hauling them around places, but are they interested in your background? I mean, do you look at them raising children in America, and are you just constantly astounded by everything and how different it is from the way you were raised, or you just don't think about it anymore?
Well, you know, growing up when we were moving around from country to country, every summer, 2 months we would spend in Karachi in that same house, my grandmother's house. So it was always something that I felt connected to. And with my children, I did the same thing when they were younger and more in my control. I did take them back for the entire summer and they would spend it with my mother, their grandmother, and my husband's parents as well. So I wanted them to at least feel like that is normal too. That world is also normal. Like I don't want them to go there feeling like tourists, you know.
Sure.
And so with the language and lots of cousins and family and culture, and so it should feel like, even though for anyone else it would feel like a completely different world, for them I wanted it to feel normal, just like it is here in Minnesota for them, normal. Beyond that, I don't know. You know, I don't know what they're going to do with their children, who they're going to marry. I don't know what's going to happen. I can't think that far. I'm an empty nester now because it takes a long time to write books. So I'm not hauling around kids anymore. But my daughter did think that I based one of the characters on her because she happened to be 15 when my 15-year-old character was being written. So probably I used, you know, a lot of her thoughts and her friends, just their conversations. And I'm sure I did because that's how we build characters. We may not just copy one human being for a character, but we notice other people and how they interact, their personalities and things. So, yeah, so that might be that intergenerational friendship, you know, that the younger character has in the present day timeline with an older Rosina.
Yeah.
I think I think that by writing it, I magically made it happen in real life, because when I was writing it, the pandemic started and we couldn't go
Sure.
back that summer, with the kids. I couldn't take them back. And so what my daughter and my mother decided were that they were going to talk on like WhatsApp video call every Sunday and keep in touch that way. And they've been doing it for so many years. My daughter is a sophomore in college now, and still every Sunday she calls my mother.
That's
And
lovely.
my son now also conferences into that call. I mean, they talk to my mom more sometimes than they talk to me. So I think it's wonderful. I think, if they can keep up connections in whichever way they can with Pakistan, I don't expect them to do it in any one particular way. But if this is what they can do, I'm all for it. Yeah.
My last question is, how did you come up with the beautiful title? Which, of course, we
Oh,
know very well because the tamarind tree is significant throughout, but I just wondered if there was any special moment at which you sort of that clicked.
yeah. When I submitted it for the mentorship to the literary agency, it needed a title. It wasn't a book. It was just like 50 pages, but it had to go with a title. So I just wrote down The House with the Tamarind Tree, because that was my grandmother's house and there was this huge tamarind tree in the back. And you would actually take um, the tamarind off and then make the chutney out of it, right from the tree. So I just gave it that title and it stuck. Giles really liked it. So I was like, okay. And that's how we submitted it to Tara at Putnam. And there was a little bit of back and forth, because the publishers really get to decide title and cover and
Yeah.
everything, because they're the experts in marketing and promotion. So there was a little bit on, the house with the was kind of cumbersome. And so it transformed into Under the Tamarind Tree, especially because it immediately puts you in a setting which is not America in a way, right? And so you want the reader to know what they're getting into. Yeah.
Marion, I see we're close to time and I think you
Oh,
wanted to open it to other.
I do, and I've had some questions in the chat which I thought I would share. And we made this time period be an hour and a half to allow for time for some questions to evolve afterwards. But since you're mentioning the tamarind tree, one of the questions has to do with nature and the way that that appears in the novel, and is that garden, the way the tamarind tree is part of your real experience of the house, is the garden part of your real experience? Along with, how did you decide to make nature have the role that it has?
I don't know how I made that decision. A reader recently said to me that, there's kangi palm. It's a plant, a sort of a short plant, and the way you described it and how it has babies from the bottom, and the metaphor is so wonderful with the generations. And I had no idea that happened. I think a lot of things just happen organically. I didn't plan a metaphor with that particular plant, but I'm not a gardener. I have been asked that too. I managed to kill all of my indoor plants. I found out that Home Depot will take them back if you kill them in a year. So I should probably do that. Yeah. Um, but I did a lot of research, I just did a lot of research, and other people, my mother has a garden there and she is part of a gardening club. So I know these things exist. I know that a lot of thought goes into it. I spoke to people. So it's not something that I do, but I know that people really enjoy it because it just gives them a lot of pleasure. And there are certain plants that are uh, very Pakistan, like the jasmine flower and the tamarind tree. And I felt like if readers could identify just a couple of things that would stay in their minds and remind them of the setting, how wonderful would that be? So it wasn't intentional. A lot of the things weren't intentional, but yes, the garden itself, the idea of an older woman being interested in her garden was an idea that I had. Yeah.
And the photography and how it relates to nature too.
Yeah. I don't know. I think some things just some things just happen. Um, I don't want to say that, characters are speaking to me because that's like so woo woo. But when you're sitting and making up a story, some things just pop into your mind. And so many things don't work. And then you just delete it all and then you start all over again. And then some of the things that you tried work and like them and then they stay. So yeah, I think the photography was also something that I was just playing around with and it worked. So yeah.
We also have a question about the audio book, and I just want to say I can already visualize this as a movie myself, but can you talk about the audio book a little bit?
Yes, I was very thrilled that there was going to be an audiobook because apparently that's also not always what happens. And one Putnam sent me 5 audio clips, like as audition clips of actors who could be narrating the audiobook. And the minute I heard Sneha Mathan's voice, I recognized it because I also listen to audiobooks and I have listened to her narrate other books. So I recognized her voice. I was supposed to rank my top 3. So I ranked my top 3, but I said, I really, really, really want Sneha. She's my number 1. So if she can do it, that's who I want. And then they said, okay, we'll get back to you. I had to go to a wedding in Ireland with some college girlfriends. So I went off there and we did a little road trip and we got back to Dublin. And my flight was the next day all the way to Minnesota, which takes a really long time because this is not the East Coast. And so we got back to Dublin. We couldn't check into the hotel because it wasn't time to check in, waiting around in this really noisy lobby because it had a bar and everything, obviously. And I get this email saying that Sneha is available and she will read your book in over 2 days, right? And those 2 days start the day after you get back. But before that, here are 5 pages of words that we need you to record in your voice in an accent that you think is correct so that Sneha can do it the correct way. Because even though she's South Asian, there are like 1 billion people who live there and everyone has a slightly different, I'm sure nobody would be able to tell, but Penguin is pretty particular about making it right. They want to make it right. So I had literally just that much time to record those 5 pages because then I'd be on a flight forever. I was trying to look for a quiet place to do it. And I asked the people, where's the business office? They sent me to the dining room, very noisy. I ended up in the ladies' room because it had the big, thick door to it. And I stood there, near the sink and with my little headphones. And I just started recording all of those words. And each time someone came in, I'd pause and then they'd use the bathroom, wash their hands, and then leave. And then I'd start recording again. So I did my 5 pages of words there, sent them off. And then Sneha did an absolutely beautiful job. I've heard from so many readers or listeners saying that they loved her. And, I reached out to her. We're friends now. And I thanked her. And she said that when she was recording, she had to actually pause a couple of times because she was overwhelmed by emotion because she's also from that region. So she could relate to many of the situations. But yeah, that was our audiobook experience, which was lovely. Yeah.
That's a fantastic story. One of the things that's sort of striking as you describe your process of writing and particularly the road to publishing and the editing, I sometimes think that authors might get really frustrated by the send it back, redo it, rework it. And what's striking about what you say is your patience and in being very accepting and expecting of all of that, going back to the drawing board, as it were. Um, do you think, and you've talked about the different parts of your brain involved in your math and CPA side and your writing side, do you think your experience with equations and numbers lends you to have a patience with reworking, um, or how do you think those things play together or not?
I don't know if those things play together. I mean, I do find that writing is like a puzzle, like a jigsaw puzzle for me, because I just have to think really hard, how to make it fit. And maybe jigsaw puzzles are like math. I don't know, not sure. But I had to really learn to grow a thick skin. That was something I had to learn because it's not easy to hear critique about your art or your writing. So I had to grow that thick skin so I could improve. Because I think after a certain point, you need the feedback. And if you're not willing to listen, then you're not going to grow. I remember I said to Tara once, the editor at Putnam, I said, Tara, you can say whatever you want to me because Giles has given me the thickest skin, which is an asset. See, asset, accounting word. It is an asset to have. Yeah.
That was great. MJ, do you want to say a quick hello before you go? I know you have to leave. If you can unmute.
Okay, there are two MJs, I think.
Oh, sorry. MJ who's writing to me as a sweet mate.
Oh my goodness.
Sorry, you're on mute.
Oh yeah, she's on mute.
We're gonna get it. She was a.
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
You are. Yes.
Nigar, Mary Jo,
Oh my
from
goodness.
Walkers.
Yes.
Hello. Speaking of which, there's my daughter.
Aw.
I am so excited to see where you're at. I can remember when you came in and took the SATs and all of that. Oh my goodness. She and I shared a door up at Cluett for our senior year. And
Yeah.
wow. I'm just, so the question that I had was, given that I have had a book in mind, kind of my story forever, and where to start. It feels like, you're eating an elephant and they say take it one bite at a time, but you're like, I have no clue where to start. And I've heard a lot of things that you've said already. But I was like, wow, someone that's been, in the same place I've been at the same age could actually put out a book. And you're like, maybe it's possible. So.
Oh, yeah. Well, first of all, hello. It's so lovely to see you. I love that this book has like brought me closer to people that I lost actually. So it's great to see you and thank you. Thank you for being here. I don't know if there's any one way to start. I took a class because I'm a nerd. I have to do that. And I think it gives you a lot of accountability. You're paying money.
Mhm.
And you have to submit the pages.
That's
So
a great way to
that
start. I like that.
yeah, that would be my suggestion. Yeah, it's great to see you. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'd love to stay in touch after this, but I won't take over the talk here. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
And the other MJ who had to leave also wanted me to share that she couldn't put the book down and that it really stays with you. You talked at the beginning about you faced a question about what would be the ROI for writing. And I wonder now, which by the smile on your face and the sound in your voice, I think it's still your happiness and joy in the process. But I also see you just expressed getting connected with people through this process. So how would you describe the ROI now if you were asked?
Oh, I think the ROI is joy, but like 100 times more because of my parents being here in the world and having read the book. I think that is very special. That it is dedicated to them also, obviously, because how could I not do that? So that's extremely special. And I have connected with so many readers who have found the book relatable in unusual ways, that I couldn't even have imagined. And I've connected with Walker's friends. I met Katrine Hansing at the Miami Book Fair. She just emailed me from, I don't know, she didn't even email me because she doesn't have my email. She connected somehow on Facebook, and she was one of my early friends from across the hall when I joined in the middle of 11th grade. She was younger than me. She said, I'm in Cuba, I'm in Havana, I'm going to be in Miami for 2 days, and you're going to be there. And I was like, what? And, after 30 something years we met, I met Judy, our teammate in Manhattan, again, through finding me through the book. And she was also across the hall, at Walker's. And it's just been amazing. I got an email from India, from Monsoon Bissell. She was also at Walker. She gave me that tour when I joined in the middle of the year. So it's just, I couldn't even have imagined, finding connections that I had lost because of a book. It's just really, really special. So I think it's the people who have added to the joy of writing. Yeah.
That's lovely. We also have a question about your English teachers at Walker's, and did they impact you?
Yes.
Recognizing it was one of 4 high schools that you went to. And similarly, after you answer, Andrea, I would love if you would repeat, maybe share what you said about your high standards because of your Walker's education.
Yes, yeah. I mean, the teachers at Walker's were fantastic. I think there was really nothing compared, And I still actually have a couple, like the portrait of an artist as a young man. It was like an award given to me by the English department. I still have that copy. It looks ancient because I am, but I carried it all around the world with me because it meant so much to me from the English department, all signed by them and everything. So yes, there's really nothing like it. I think when teachers tell you that you can write or you should write, it makes a huge difference. And it's nothing for them to say it, it's probably, now that I think about it, they probably just say it to every student, but it makes a big impact, and it made a big impact on me that, yeah, you could write. So thank you.
Did you want me to?
Yes.
Well, I always have said to everybody, because I don't write fiction, but in your whatever job you have, you always have to write. And I always get complimented on my writing, and I just always say, a couple of really good English teachers in high school did it. I learned how to write papers. They went through multiple revisions from my teachers. I learned, although, if I had a copy editor, they'd probably tell me my grammar was terrible, but I learned so much grammar that I spend a lot of time in my life just going out of my mind with rage at other people who can't pull their grammar together on a piece of paper, or even in their speech. But I just learned what makes a good book. And I feel this sounds arrogant, but when there are books that are bestsellers, I can very confidently say, well, they're not any good because the character isn't good. There's no transformation from the character as they go through the book. And I stand by that. And I know I learned the absolute best. I learned what it is to create a good piece of writing. And I really, I got to college and I placed out of the mandatory writing program because I had just gotten such a good education on, and my beloved Lily, who's on this call, was a classmate of mine, and we sat through some of those crazy English classes. We still talk about our teachers, but I don't think there's anything more important than a really good English teacher. And obviously, whatever math teachers I had didn't really sink in because I'm hopeless. So I don't have the right brain. There is no left brain. So I have to really focus on the great English teachers.
Nigar, is there anything that you would want to share with us that we haven't asked you about?
No, I can't thank you enough for this. And Andrea, the questions and the depth and just the effort that you put into this. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And everyone for being here. Yes.
Good. Well, I want to thank everyone for being here, specifically, most of all, the two of you. And I also want to take a moment to say that we will have another alumni author book talk on April 9th. And that author is also from the 80s, the class of 85, Wendy Walker, a very different book, but with some definite mystery woven through it. And I can tell you that we've got a moderator for that one, who is actually from the class of 2001. Her name is Sasha Breland, and she is the Deputy Chief Medical Examiner in Washington, D.C. And her background in forensics will become important in talking about the book that's called What Remains. So thank you for attending this one. Please attend another. And I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't say, please take a moment, if you haven't, to support the Walker's Annual Fund, because your gifts allow for this wonderful education to keep going on today. So we are really grateful for everyone participating in lifting our students and faculty up now. So thank you all. And if anyone has any other questions, let me know. But otherwise, I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening wherever you are.